Hey there, middle schoolers, and welcome back to art. Today, we are going to dive into the world of shading. Shading. Do you mean we're going to go sit underneath some trees or maybe an umbrella? Not quite. You're not getting off that easy. No, we're talking about shading in our drawing. And why is shading important? Well, it brings a couple of elements of art to the forefront of our drawings. And those elements are value and form. Yeah, value and form. So what is value? Well, it's the lightness or darkness of a color. Yeah, value deals with lights and darks, such as light from the sun or dark from a shadow. So it's important for us to know this element of value because we understand objects on how light hits them, dark or light. So it's incredibly important that we have correct value in our art. Next up is form. And form, simply put, is three-dimensional objects in art. Well, how do we make these forms go from a shape into a 3D object? It's very simple. They have length and they have width, just like a shape, but they also have depth. And we're going to use shading to create that depth. First things first, you need a sheet of paper. This can also be done in your sketchbook. Next up, a pencil. Any type of pencil, nice and sharp. So you might want a pencil sharpener. Then, if you have an eraser, a larger one, that might work better, because sometimes this one on the end doesn't work so hot. Lastly, we'll need a ruler to start, and some sort of a round object you could trace. I'm using a cup. So our first step is to trace that round object to create two circles that we will eventually turn into forms. Once we have these two circles drawn, one on top of another, then we are going to draw some rectangles directly across from them. I'm using a ruler to help myself out and measuring 2 inches down. There's that measuring again. I will also do another line across my paper 2 inches down. I will then connect them, making a rectangle. I will do the same step on the bottom. That looks good. Now let's try out some techniques. First up, hatching. What's hatching, you ask? We're going to make some lines that go from one side of our rectangle to the other. You can pick which end you start on. I'm starting down here. I will start by very gently pressing my pencil and creating lines that go from the top to the bottom of my rectangle. As I move across, I will press harder and harder, very slowly, creating darker lines. I want to make sure early on in my hatching that these lines are evenly spaced. And as I press darker and move further, I can bring these lines together. Eventually, I can't make my lines any darker, so I will make them wider, essentially doubling them up. Instead of one line, it'll be two lines next to each other. Again, I'm going to make sure that I don't have too much space between these lines. And as I move on from doubling up, I'll triple up, quadruple up, until I have some pretty thick lines at the end, just like this. There you have it. You've made your first value range using hatching. All right, now it's time to make some form out of this circle here. First things first, we need to choose a light source. I'm going to choose the corner and draw an arrow so I know exactly where the light's coming from on my object. Then we can hatch. To do this hatching, we are going to make some lines that go across our circle. They won't be straight lines, they'll be more curved to go along with our shape. And again, we're going to start with some very light lines, if any. And we're going to do this closest to our light source because that's where our object will be brightest. And we will slowly work our way down with darker lines that are closer together, slowly getting bigger, just like we did on our value scale. Let's try it out. After the hatching, we think about the shadow. Where does that light source come from? The corner. So the opposite side of our newly created sphere will have this shadow. And again, we will use lines, the longest line being in the middle of our shadow, and slowly pressing lightly and making smaller lines as we move across to create this shadow and to have a truly unique form. Well done. Now, don't be afraid to pause and finish up hatching before we move on to this second technique. As you can see, next up, cross hatching, where we will have not only vertical lines across our rectangle, but horizontal lines as well. Yeah, making a cross hatching. So we're going to start the same way we did on hatching, pressing very lightly and slowly pressing firmer, keeping those lines evenly spaced. I'm going to divide my cross hatching up into 3 sections. So once I've got a third of the way through, then I will stop and start to add my horizontal lines that cross my vertical lines. And again, at the beginning, I will barely press, slowly pressing firmer as I come across, but not too firm because I'm not into my dark section yet. And I will do this all the way up my rectangle. Once I'm done crossing that section, I'll move on to my next section. And now my lines will become increasingly darker, increasingly closer, and I might even start to double up and triple up in this section. Once I've completed my vertical lines, I will come back through and crosshatch with the horizontal lines, pressing even firmer and putting my lines even closer together, like this. Once I'm done with my second section, I'm going to go back and connect it to my first section so I have a nice seamless transition. Then I will move on to my third section where my lines become increasingly closer, increasingly darker, and I start to double and triple and maybe even quadruple up my lines. Once I finish the vertical lines, I'll go back and add my horizontal lines, this time making them even darker, even closer, even more lines. Nice. Now we've created a value range using crosshatching. Let's move over to this circle and turn it into a form using crosshatching. First, I'm going to pick my light source in the opposite corner this time. Then I will make my lines across my sphere, gently curving, just like the top circle. Once I've done that, I will come back in for the crosshatch. All right, once I've done my hatching following my light source, now I will make my cross hatching, doing the same thing, starting dark on one side and coming light to the other. Now we don't want to make straight lines straight across. Maybe our first one can, but the next lines after that should have a slight curve and appear as if they're coming out of the bottom of our sphere, slowly curving. And it's hatching, just like the regular hatching. We'll start darker where it's darker and slowly get light as we draw closer to that light source. So have some fun cross hatching your sphere. All right, we finished our cross hatching, and it appears as all those lines are coming from the bottom. Now we want to add our shadowing. Again, the opposite side of our light source, and very similar to our hatching shadow, using lines that slowly get smaller when they come from the center. The only difference is this time we'll have lines coming across that shadow as well to create a cross-hatching shadow. There you have it. All right, let's see what we've got. We have a value range using hatching. Using that same hatching, we've created a sphere, a form. Then we took cross hatching, created a value range, and again, use that technique to make a form sphere. Pretty nice. Don't forget your light source. Make sure you're using a pencil, taking your time. This is just an exercise, so it's all right to make mistakes. Use your eraser. That's what it's there for. So those are just two of our shading techniques so far to bring some more value and form into our drawings. And I have a feeling that in some of the upcoming weeks, we might be learning a few more shading techniques. All right, until next time, middle schoolers, see you later.